It stopped.
Often we forget what villains and monsters are, what they represent. I spend a lot of time trying to recontextualize these characters to explain why they're present in stories, but I still come across popular opinions that refuse to see the psychoanalytical reasonings and instead focus on real-life morality. These arguments aren't going away anytime soon, so I'll continue to discuss them. The fun part about this topic is that there's always a new way to look at it. Stories and art provide new lenses all the time. Even revisiting a story or artwork can provide new insights since we are always growing and changing ourselves. My only hope is that we do continue to see these stories that play with the most basic of fairy tale archetypes. Maybe selfishly though, because I really just want to continue analyzing them. So let's talk about monsters specifically.
What do you mean by monster?
Well, by a monster, I mean someone who breaks all of your standards for harmony and for ethical conduct.
Monsters are our children. In Beauty and the Beast, classic tales about animal brides and grooms from around the world, Maria Tatar states that we make the mistake of locating the origins of monsters in exotic regions and terrain, but they cohabit the world with us as alter egos that capture the anxieties we disown, disavow, and project onto creatures who are different from us. They challenge us to ask how we created them, and by following their cues, we can begin to discover in our projections exactly who we are and what makes us as ferocious, predatory, and cruel as the monsters out there.
That's not a pet. It's a monster, and we're not keeping it.
In fandom discourse, we see all the time that people forget that monsters aren't real. We create them through art and storytelling. They're projections of something internal, something that we have to confront. In the 1980s and 90s, the US was obsessed with certain types of monsters, and I want to specifically note aliens and dinosaurs. This projection was likely about many Americans being aliens themselves, as well as archaeologists digging up a history that is not their own, and the reality, the shame, bites back. It is fear of the other, of immigrants and indigenous, that is projected onto these strange and frightening things. These are shadows of a collective human experience, but there are many kinds of monsters if we want to organize them by their meanings. They may be representative of shadows, fears, or our anima or animus, and these things can overlap, and most often do, to create a monstrosity filled with many anxieties about the world and the self. This instinctive practice to write these monsters down, to create them in books and on screen, to breathe life into them, enables us to confront them, talk to them, and potentially love them.
I mean, you could take someone who you would think of as being a monster. That is an ethical judgment on the life. And this is transcendental ethics, no didactic here.
So that's where I would disagree with you, because it seems to me in order to experience the epiphany, that which you behold but do not want to possess must be beautiful in some way. And a moment ago when you talked about your peak experience, running, you said it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful is an aesthetic word.
That's right.
And how can you behold a monster?
I tell you, there's another emotion associated with art, which is not of the beautiful, but of the sublime. And what we call monsters can be seen as sublime. And they represent powers too great for the mere forms of life to survive.
The word sublime comes from the Latin word sublimus, meaning lofty, high, exalted, eminent, distinguished, or more literally, sloping up to the threshold. Sublimation also comes from sublimus. In alchemical symbology, sublimation is the process of purifying a material by heating up and cooling and capturing the vapors at the top of the distiller. This process was seen as separating the spirit from the body and essentially making the spirit corporeal by capturing and crystallizing those vapors. And what Campbell means here when he says that monsters can be seen as sublime is that monsters are elevated, imposing ideas. If we take it a step further, we could say that monsters are spiritual beings born from the process of distillation, captured in the top of the distiller, and made corporeal. In psychological terms, that simply means that monsters are projections of the psyche. The thing that always bothered me about Del Toro's Shape of Water was that the monster isn't monstrous, which is surprising given what it is based on and Del Toro's other work. It's puzzling that the heroine's not frightened initially by the monster. The monster is depicted as being beautiful, graceful, and non-violent. It's very similar to our heroine. Neither of them have a voice, both of them want to be free. So this is not the kind of monster romance that I am seeking. I like the film for other reasons. It's a beautiful story about how love takes many forms, but I do think there were missed opportunities and perhaps misuse of some essential themes, particularly of Beauty and the Beast, because that story is ultimately one about pairs of opposites. A beast that swallows. In a separate video, I talked about the symbol of the bear being important in Keep Breathing, a story about a young woman who is trying to survive in the wilderness while she undergoes a psychological transformation, letting go of a mother who abandoned her and accepting and fighting for her own potential motherhood. The bear represented the cycle of life and death, but more importantly, birth and renewal. The bear was at first frightening, but appeared to live in her dream to show her what food she needed to eat to survive. In a very different story, the bear in Carmy's dream is violent towards him. The bear is monstrous and aggressive, and within the text, the bear has multiple meanings. It's a love letter to Chicago, it's Carmy's nickname, it's the restaurant that he envisioned running with his brother, and it is also the piece of Carmy that is released with the death of his brother. It's caged on the bridge where Mikey killed himself. It represents grief from losing Mikey, but it's also this intense and visceral expression of Carmy's shadow.
I know.
But also, following the release of the bear from its cage, the restaurant itself is the bear. It is a monster that feeds off the shadows of the people working within it. The restaurant growls back, practically spitting in Carmy's face. It turns itself off, revealing truths and internal conflicts in each chef and refusing to turn back on until those conflicts are acknowledged.
I understand.
But the bear still grunts and grumbles under the surface, unfed and unsatisfied. It makes Marcus obsessive, it makes Sid violent. Tina becomes a little bit too familial in her work environment, and Richie becomes even more unhinged than usual. In the end, Carmy harnesses the bear, embraces its image, and incorporates the different aspects of each character into the final vision of what's to come. The restaurant itself is the beast, and Carmy is the studious beauty who, through the power of love, creates a new home where the now transformed beast can finally be at peace. This expression of a monster is one about love. Rather than killing the monster, a more satisfying end is to transform it or marry it to yourself. Carl Jung wrote on what he called the beast theme, which was a dream that many young women would have. Jung saw this dream with a certain sexual meaning, how young women relate to their fathers whilst going through sexual development. But essentially, he saw the beast as representing the unpredictable sexuality that is suddenly exposing itself. The dream showed her being chased by a furious bull. She fled at first, but realized it was no use. She fell and the bull was upon her. She knew her only hope was to sing to the bull. And when she did, though in a quavering voice, the bull calmed down and began licking her hand with its tongue. The interpretation showed that she can now learn to relate to men in a more confidently feminine way, not only sexually, but erotically in the wider sense of relatedness on the level of her conscious identity. This theme doesn't just work for young women, though. In the cases of older women, the beast theme may not indicate the need to find the answer to a personal father fixation or to release a sexual inhibition. It can be, in fact, the expression of a certain kind of woman's initiation, which may be just as meaningful at the onset of menopause as at the height of adolescence. And it may appear at any age, when the union of spirit and nature has been disturbed. Monsters do bad things. In Warm Bodies, the monsters are hungry for emotions. They yearn to feel and to love. They do this through eating brains. R, our hero in the story,
Why not just call you R?
is a monster who eats the heroine's boyfriend and continues to eat pieces of him in order to get to know her more. This is definitely a monster that does bad things. But the cure to making the monsters human again is really just love, taking the time to teach them and remind them how to be human again. The very presence of a monster in a story begs for redemption. Humans yearn for compassion and companionship. We want to be understood and loved despite our ugliness and broken bits. And that is what monsters are, the ugly and broken parts of us begging to be loved and healed. Sure, there are some stories in which the monster is defeated and that is satisfying, but that is also a form of redemption. Cleansing the society of the dark parts of itself is redeeming that society. But transforming rather than cleansing is more difficult. It takes more time, more compassion, and fewer guns. All villains are stuck in the deepest, darkest step of the hero's journey. Some unwilling to see the world as worthy of their new powers. Some unwilling to leave the powerful and nurturing lap of the goddess. If they stay there too long, they become monsters. All that dark gunk they found in the depths clings to them. They may think it makes them powerful, but it simply makes them depressed. All of these characters, regardless of their bad deeds, are worthy of the journey back to the light and a community that will embrace them. What about feminine monsters? One of the reasons I think women relate to and romanticize monsters is because they are so used to being demonized. Medusa's story is a tragedy, and yet she's seen mostly as a villain. Most villains in Disney princess stories are evil stepmothers or witches with gross or animalistic characteristics. For women, the boundaries of acceptability are strict, and they are many. We must be seductive but pure, quiet but not aloof, fragile but industrious, and always, always small. We must not be too successful, too ambitious, too independent, too self-centered, and when we can't manage all the contradictory restrictions, we are turned into grotesques. Women have been monsters and monsters have been women in centuries worth of stories, because stories are a way to encode these expectations and pass them on. The history of monsters and fairy tales has a distinct shift, however, from a true fear of the natural world to an appeal to something that we forgot. In a society in which most of us will never encounter true danger in the woods, the bear who comes knocking at our window is not such a frightening creature. Instead, he's exotic, almost appealing. Where once wilderness was threatening to civilization, now it's been tamed and cultivated or set aside and preserved. The dangers of the animal world now have a nostalgic quality, removed as they are from our daily existence. This removal gives the wild a different kind of power. It's something we long for rather than fear. In the Western tradition especially, girls were raised with the rules that they could not play in the mud with boys. They could not drive the go-kart or risk getting their dresses dirty. A lot of this is changing, but the knee-jerking, angry reactions to girls dressing like or acting like boys is still there. When these kids grow into adults, they may find this deep, monstrous rage within them. Clarissa Pinkola Estes recalls being raised in a Western evangelical community. It was a time when parents who abused their children were simply called strict, when the spiritual lacerations of profoundly exploited women were referred to as nervous breakdowns, when girls and women who were tightly girdled, tightly reined, and tightly muzzled were called nice, and those other females who managed to slip the collar for a moment or two of life were branded bad. So like many women before and after me, I lived my life as a disguised creature. Like my kith and kin before me, I staggered in high heels, and I wore a dress and hat to church. But my fabulous tail often fell below my hemline, and my ears twitched until my hat pitched, at the very least, down over both my eyes and sometimes clear across the room. Anyone who has experienced this sort of muzzle on their true self will undoubtedly relate to a monster who is shackled and told that they are dangerous. Girls and boys are told in different ways that they have the potential to be monsters, those that seduce and those that maim. And by teaching that to children, we continue the cycle of patriarchy and violence. We create the monsters by making them fearful of what's inside of them.
As someone who is also very much plus size, it's almost like unthinkable to think that someone would like me because I have issues with my own body, but a monster could love me for who I am. I don't know if any man that I think is attractive would find me attractive, but a monster, if he found me attractive or he found my personality likable, then we could fall for each other.
Monsters are honest with others and with themselves.
And you called me a monster.
You are a monster.
Yes, I am.
In romance, they may represent a yearning to embrace that part of yourself that you have been ignoring. If you struggle with intimacy, you might imagine a monster forcing you to be intimate. This internal fantasy allows us to play with our needs and wants in a safe way. It's an exaggeration that makes your own jumbled thoughts more clear. The characters and the stories that we write are parts of ourselves that we are trying to understand. Destroying a monster is overcoming something big and redeeming the soul, but falling in love with it and accepting it as a part of yourself can be more helpful in the long run, for the self and for the collective. What if every beast found its beauty? What if we learned that the other is a part of who we are? What if we could love someone despite the darkness that they carry? In the process of individuation, we sort out parts of ourselves and then marry them back together, creating something new.
네가 원하는 대로 살 수 있어. 욕망을 드러내면 난 괴물이 되는 거고.
그래. 이제 원하는 걸 말해봐.
The same thing occurs when we fall in love and decide to dedicate ourselves to that other person. A union of two becomes one, something new. The union is not just two mixed together. It's not just a little bit of you and a little bit of your partner. It's something entirely different. The union of opposites is profoundly revolutionary. Within us, this internal change helps us to be better individuals. In story, it provides us a way to see beyond the initial differences to a world that is changed by the union itself. Basically, the devil and angel that are sitting on the opposite sides of your shoulders should probably kiss and make up.
These two pairs of opposites come forth as male and female from the two sides. One has eaten of the tree of the knowledge, not only of good and evil, but of male and female, of right and wrong, of this and that, of light and dark. Everything in the field of time is dual, past and future, dead and alive. All this, being and non-being, is, isn't.
And what's the significance of them being beside the mask of God, the mask of eternity? What is this sculpture saying to us?
The mask represents the middle, and the two represent the two opposites. And they always come in pairs. And put your mind in the middle. Most of us put our minds on the side of the good against what we think of as evil. It was Heraclitus, I think, who said, for God, all things are good and right and just, but for man, some things are right and others are not. You're in the field of time when you're man. And one of the problems of life is to live in the realization of both terms. That's to say, I know the center, and I know that good and evil are simply temporal apparitions.
So embrace the monster, make out with it. Hell, get all it wants is your compassion and your love. Thanks to everyone who watched this. Let me know in the comments who your favorite monsters are and what you like to do with them in the stories that you write or in the art that you make. And don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that fun stuff. All right, cheers.